never ran out. There's Amma Takum. She served as an Amma to a group of women. Amma is the, like they call the men Abba and the woman Amma, mother. She had a reputation for strong and unwavering leadership. And she's actually really interesting because she's one of the later ones in the 5th century, and a nearby Abba wanted to appoint a priest to her community, and she resisted having a male priest come to them, and there was a battle over authority. And it is wondered whether this was the start of the cultural shift, where the women in their own communities were suddenly, the men wanted to impose, to bring the priests into them. Susan, to include Susan. Susan was is called a hermit, a woman who is described as holy, and her appearance shows strength in God. She was from a noble family. She was known for her devotion. At 8 years old, she wanted to go to Jerusalem, but her parents refused because she was so young. But finally, she actually ran away from home and joined a caravan of women travelling to Jerusalem. When they were to return, she refused to join them, and she went to a monastery for women near Gaza, and she lived there for 10 years. And then, when the monastery came under persecution, she actually left for the desert beyond Alexandria and lived there for some years, and then 5 other nuns joined her. And they went deeper into the desert, and they lived together, sharing a common solitary life. She would often go out wandering and praying on her own, and then eventually discovered an underground cave where she just moved in, and she refused to leave the cave and stood there, stayed there for many years, only accepting a Sunday offering of dried bread and a pitcher of water. Here's another one. Asea and her sister Marcia were members of a wealthy Roman family. This seems to be a big theme with the Desert Mothers going through them. Many of them were members of very wealthy, noble families. And she was another one. At the age of 12, she chose to live a solitary life. She had a narrow cell initially in her family home in Rome. This is what Jerome says of her. Enclosed in the narrow confines of a single cell, she enjoyed the wide pastures of paradise. The same patch of earth existed as her place both of prayer and of rest. Fasting was her recreation, and hunger her refreshment. If she took food, it was not from love of eating, but from human exhaustion, and the bread, salt, and cold water to which she restricted herself sharpened more than appeased her appetite. I'm not really going to talk about many more of these, but this book and the other books are just full of name after name of women who forsake what they had to go and live in the desert, to pray, to receive guests, to offer words of wisdom. Have some of those words highlighted. Here's a saying from Amma Sinclair. There are many who live in the mountains and behave as if they were in the town, and they are wasting their time. It is possible to be a solitary in one's mind while living in a crowd, and it is possible for one who is solitary to live in the crowd of personal thoughts. Another saying, if one is habitually listening to secular speech, how can one yet live for God alone, as you suggest? Just as when you are sitting at table and there are many courses, you take some, but with pleasure. So when secular conversations come your way, have your heart turned towards God, and thanks to this disposition, you will hear them without pleasure, and they will not do you any harm. Some more in. Mario. Salvation is exactly this, the twofold love of God and of our neighbour. Here's one given in advice to those who were going to be soul friends to others. A teacher ought to be a stranger to the desire for domination, vainglory and pride. A teacher should not be fooled by flattery, nor blinded by gifts, conquered by the stomach, nor dominated by anger. A teacher should be patient, gentle and humble as far as possible, successfully tested and without partisanship, full of concern and a lover of souls. The final one. If you find yourself in a monastery, do not go to another place, for that will harm you a great deal. Just as the bird who abandons the eggs she was sitting on prevents them from hatching, so the monk or nun grows cold and their faith dies when they go from one place to another. So that is really just a very brief taste of some of the sayings, some of these people. There's more literature available than I have. There's a lot we can learn from these desert mothers. I just picked out a few things that, as I was reading through it, came to mind. We can learn about spirituality. We can learn about their refusal to judge others. We can learn about seeking sacred space and time. We can learn about recognizing God's presence through our daily routine. We can learn not to be in a rush, but to take time. We can learn about seeking to be a soul friend and about finding ourselves a soul friend. We can think about moderation and balance in our daily lives. And that's just a few things. I could have made a much longer list of what we can learn from these desert mothers. And I think it's really important that we build these into our lives as part of our Christian heritage. What I would like to do now for a few minutes is, I've got some questions here and wondered if perhaps we could split up into groups, maybe even 3 groups with just 3 people in. And I want the questions I would like you just to talk briefly about, and then we'll talk as a group, is, were you aware of the importance of women throughout the ages? And as you hear just this brief introduction to a huge yet forgotten part of our Christian heritage, what saddens you and what excites you? And what, as a woman or an advocate for women, do you think the new monasticism can offer you or should offer you? Okay? We'll perhaps discuss those in groups.